Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different from my normal videos, which is that I'm actually doing a tutorial video today, which I'm super excited about. I haven't filmed a video in a while, so bear with me as I try to get back into the swing of doing videos. So the tutorial that I'm going to do is one that a bunch of you have asked me for, and a lot of people, especially on Instagram, have shown a lot of interest in, and that is I'm going to be doing a step-by-step tutorial on how to edge a deck. I'm going to be edging the Flowers of the Night Oracle. My mom asked me to edge that. And what I thought I'd do is take a moment to show you guys how I do it, like what tools you can use, how it looks in the end, the different tools and different finishes, and all kinds of like stuff, because I've noticed a lot of you seem to be very hesitant about edging tarot decks. So maybe this will give you a little bit of a boost of confidence for you to be able to edge your first deck. I have edged most of the decks in my deck collection. Most of them are edged in some manner, edged, chopped. Eventually I'd like to do a tutorial on trimming a tarot deck, because that's another thing that you guys seem to be super interested in. But anyway, this one's going to be about edging the decks, and I have yet to actually ruin a tarot deck by edging it. I've definitely gone over, you know, the fronts to the backs. I've messed up a little bit in some places, but I've yet to actually completely ruin a deck beyond use, just so you know. So when you go to edge a deck, of course with your first deck, I recommend using one you're not super attached to, and that way if you do make a big mistake, it's not that big a deal, or one that's like a mass market that you can get again. But that's just, you know, beginner stuff. If you're going to chop a deck for the first time, you want to make sure it's not, you know, your super expensive, very hard to find out of print deck. Today I am drinking peppermint tea. Just regular peppermint tea out of my favorite Renoir mug, which I got from the Cleveland Museum of Art. Okay, so let's dive in. I'm going to show you some of the tools that I use, and we'll talk about that first before we get into actually edging the deck. So let's do that now. So a lot of the tools that are going to be used for edging the deck can be found either in like the art section of a craft store or in the scrapbooking section of a craft store. All of the stuff that I use are ones that I can find in America. So if you're not in the US, you might find slightly different brands. I'll try to get more into the details and the specifics about why, so that you can find the equivalent in your country. So two of the most used items to edge decks are stamp pads and markers. So I'm going to go over the markers first. Whenever I edge a deck in black, and I have a ton of black edged decks, I use this Marks a Lot permanent marker. And there are a couple reasons why I use the Marks a Lot. Sorry. One reason is because I found they dry really quickly and they don't have a smell. I know some people have used Sharpie markers to edge their decks. I've personally never done that, so I can't speak as to whether or not a Sharpie is like a good substitution for the Marks a Lot. I know there are some other permanent markers that people have used to edge decks. The only ones I know of are Marks a Lot and Winsor Newton, which I actually have here to show you as well. I think Winsor Newtons are ones you can get in the UK. I would appreciate it if anybody's from the UK and they've edged a deck before, if you could pop down in the comments some permanent markers that you can get in the UK that are good for that. So another reason I use the Marks a Lot markers, let's see if this is going to focus, is because it has a chisel tip. Now, chisel tip, for those of you who might not be familiar, is a tip that's slanted. So as you can see, it's got a little slant. This one's kind of fuzzy from use. I've used it a lot. Come on, focus. There we go. But the chisel tip is really nice because it allows you to get a good angle when you're edging your card. And I'll show you that later, because the Marks a Lot marker is what I'm going to be using to edge the Flowers of the Night Oracle. Okay. So the other markers, as I mentioned before, are Winsor Newton. This is a metallic marker, which means that it will have a metallic finish. And I'm going to show you a deck that I've actually edged in the Winsor Newton. I edged it in the silver metallic marker. And that was the first deck I ever edged, and it's my Fountain Tarot. I may have shown this in a previous video. Let me grab some of the cards. It had a silver gilding, but I chopped the deck. There you go, you can see like the gilding there. I chopped the deck and instead edged it in the metallic. This is very faded from use, so it's not as shiny as it used to be. That's a nice gray edging. Because this is my first deck, as you can see here along the edges, I went over on some of the edges on the back and a little bit on the front as well. It was my first, so it wasn't super well done. But as you can see, it's not. If you're super picky, you know that this might bother you. It's personally never bothered me. But you know, to each their own, different strokes for different folks. Okay. Set that off to the side. So that's the Winsor Newton metallic markers. Metallics are good if you kind of want a substitute for like a gilded edging. So the Winsor Newtons have two ends. They have a little bud end. I personally don't tend to use the bud end to edge if I can help it. What's the other end on these? The small butt end, as you can see, this one's gotten a lot more use. It's like super fuzzy. I prefer the chunkier end of the Winsor Newton markers just because, like with the chisel tip, you're getting a little bit more coverage. And I can talk about a little bit more about that when we actually get into edging the card. Now, some other markers that you can use. These ones tend to be more affordable, more easily found. The other markers I tend to use are called Copic markers. The Copics are Japanese art markers. They're alcohol-based. Markers tend to be either water-based or alcohol-based. The water-based ones are not as good for edging cards because they take longer to dry. So these ones are great because they come in a huge, wide variety of colors. They have a brush end and a chisel end, and the chisel end, of course, is super useful for edging your decks. The brush end also, if you're an artist, they're very like easy to color with, super flexible. They're really great markers. They tend to run about somewhere between $7 to $9 in US dollars. So they're a bit of an investment, but they last for a really long time. And if you're super invested in it, you can like refill the markers. I've never refilled them because for me, it's just easier to buy a new marker when one runs out. So the two different ones that I have here, I have the Copic Chow and the Copic Sketch. As far as ink goes, there is no difference between them. I have two different ones because they stopped making a lot of the Chows a couple years ago, and they started making more of the Copic Sketches. So when I wanted new colors and specific colors, I got them in the sketches. There's no difference except in how you store them. And if you have Copic Chows or Copic Sketches and you want to know how to store them, just pop me a comment down below and I'll be happy to tell you, and I can even like show you pictures of how I store my markers. So I found these work super well for edging decks if you get your hands on them. I edged my Bridge Witches Tarot using Copic markers, and the reason I chose to do this, of course, is because I did a multicolored edging on this deck. I've shown it on Instagram before. Isn't it gorgeous? So pretty. And I edged it based on the colors on the front of the cards. And just, I was able to do this, like I said, because I have a large collection of the Copic markers. What's very important when it comes to edging your deck, just as a rule, is to make sure that your inks are alcohol-based. Because, as I said before, they dry a lot quicker, and they also tend to be a lot harder wearing than any other kind of ink. Other inks can fade very quickly if you have sweaty hands. I do. If you have sweaty hands and you get very sweaty when shuffling a deck, sometimes the pigment can come off even after it's dried. So that's why it's important to get an alcohol-based marker, because that's less likely to happen. I should say marker or ink pad. So now I'm going to talk about the ink pads. There's really very little difference in between. I should push these so you guys can actually see them. There's very little difference, as I was saying, between ink pads and markers. The biggest difference is how you hold them when you're edging your decks. So you can get ink pads in a variety of sizes. Personally, I like the little ones because they're so much easier to use. They're a lot easier to handle, and I find my hand gets less cramped when I'm using them. Now I like, if you can get Tim Holtz. It looks like Jim. I think it's Tim Holtz Distress ink. I like these ones because they tend to be light colors that you can layer really well. So if you're looking for a specific color, you can layer colors. This antique linen is great for edging like antique looking decks that have like a cream background. Another one I use is these Dewdrops Memento, because they come in a lot of colors. And as you can see, they say fade resistant dye ink. Fade resistant is good as well. I'm not sure about the difference between acid free or non-acid free, but these I found in like a scrapbooking section. And looking on the back, okay, actually I lied when I said that I never used water-based. These ones are acid-free, water-based, fade-resistant, fast-drying. So I personally prefer alcohol-based, because when I use these tend to take slightly longer to dry. So alcohol-based, it's really easy. Water-based, you'll want to make sure you let them dry for a nice long time before you like stack them up. But it's also good to look for like fade resistant, fast drying is especially good. Let's take a look at these ones as well. Adult use only, so make sure you're an adult. No, you don't have to be an adult. Anyway, I do prefer alcohol based. That's my personal preference. But you can use these, and a lot of ink pads also come in metallics, so if you can't get your hands on like a Winsor Newton metallic, these do, by the way, take a long time to dry, the Winsor Newtons. I've heard some people say that they come off on their hands. I've never had that happen to me, but they definitely do take a while to dry. So those are some of the tools that you can use. Another tool that's invaluable when you're edging a deck is just a regular old tea towel. And I'll show you why a tea towel is important. So here's a deck that I edged in one of these Memento ink pads. It's my Earthbound Oracle. I keep forgetting to post pictures of this on Instagram. I edged it in red. And as you can see with this edging, the color didn't take as strongly as some other decks' colors have been. I should show you at this point too. I forgot to earlier. This is my Deviant Moon deck, my Deviant Moon borderless, which was done with the Mark Salon. As you can see, it took really dark. It's actually got kind of a shiny finish to it. I'm not sure if that's the cardstock or the marker. And then you can compare that with the ink pad, where it didn't take quite as well. It took a little bit spotty. Now I do like actually a little bit of the antiqued look. I can't decide if I'm going to go over it again or not. I may do that in the future. But I found with most ink pads they usually need 2 goes around, whereas the markers typically only need 1. Another thing I will say is what I like about just edging my decks in black with these Mark Salon markers is that my Stretch Terror, which is one of my favorite Terror decks, I edged it in black, and I've only had to redo the edging once, which was after over a year of incredibly heavy use. I just went through and gave it a fresh black edging, and it really like refreshed it. I didn't realize how gray the edging had gotten. So if you have like a good fade resistant marker, permanent marker, it keeps very well and it doesn't come off. I've never had the Mark Salon markers or the Copic markers come off on my hands when I've used them to edge a deck, even though my palms can be sweaty. Okay, so now I'm going to get into actually edging the deck. If you have a deck of your own, you can feel free to follow along with me. If you don't, just, you know, sit back and enjoy. I'm going to speed up the process after I've shown you how to edge the first card. So what I do when I edge a card is I take the card, and this is, I feel, the most important part, is I edge it always with the back facing towards me. So when you take your chisel tip, you want to make sure the longest end is pointed upward and that you have the card back facing to you. So start, and let me see if I can do this on camera. So stabilize it, put the edge to it, and then just run along the edge. Bloop. Easy as that. What's nice about this deck is because it's black on the front and back, you're not going to see if I accidentally go over the edge. One of the trickiest parts tend to be the corners. I notice I tend to miss corners a lot. So you just go a little bit over there and then go around again. There you go. Turn your card, put the chisel tip on, just glide right along the edge. It helps to press down a little bit so that you're not going too light, you don't skip over any spots. Again, looking for the corners. And doot doot. Okay, and we're done. We've edged our first card. And I just lay that flat, push it away, and then I'll just leave that to dry for a little bit. Take my second card, again, back facing towards me. Ooh, the camera's being blown out. And what's I think most important about this is just that you have a good hand on your marker, and you just take it nice and slow. Just go really steady, really slow. And of course, it'll always depend on the type of cardstock, how the ink is taken. With a card like this, you have a really shiny cardstock but very raw paper edges. So the ink is going to take really well actually to the raw paper edges. I found shiny decks are some of the best to edge because, like I said, the edges are just raw paper. There's no shine on the edges, so it takes perfectly. And also, because of the shiny finish, if I were to actually like go over, I'm not going to do it obviously, but if I accidentally went over one of the edges or something like that and like made a mark, most of the time you can grab a tea towel and just like wipe it off real quick. Okay, so that's pretty much the gist of edging a deck. See, it's just, I'm going to try to keep it, and they're just going around. And there's my dog barking in the background. My brother's doing a very nice job of trying to keep her quiet, but she's very certain that the mailman is a burglar. So, yeah. There's another card edged. Which, yeah, you can see even I don't have any ink on my hands. Everything's like going great. So, I'm going to edge some more cards and then come back and tell you about what we do after I've let them dry for a little bit. Okay? See you guys on the flip side. Okay guys, so I'm back. I have edged about a quarter of the deck. It's been about 15 minutes since I edged the first card, which for the Marks-a-Lot marker means that's probably dry. If you've never edged a deck with a particular marker before, I'd say it's best to give it like 20 minutes to a half an hour to let it dry before you start handling the card. As you can see, I've laid out all my cards so they're not touching, nothing's overlapping. This will help to make sure that you don't, get any ink on the fronts of your cards. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the first card we edged, pick it up, and then we're going to use our tea towel, let's see if I can do this, and just wipe the edge of the card against the tea towel. You can see if it leaves no mark, it's pretty much dry. So I'm just going to do that with all the edges. That's just to make sure that if there's any trace ink on it, it's not going to come off on any of the other cards. So now I'm going to take the second card, do the same thing. There we go. Nice and dry. So I'm going to do that with the rest of the cards, and then I'm going to come back and show you the difference and then give you some final tips and tricks. Okay. Okay, and we're back, and here's what the deck looks like. Ta-da! Let's see if I've missed a little bit on some of the edges, but let's look at before and after. I mean, how crazy is that, guys? It really changes the entire look of a deck to give it a nice edging. Look at that. Ah, I love that. Okay, so some final tips and tricks I'm going to give you before I go off and finish edging the rest of my deck is that when you're using an ink pad as opposed to using a marker, it's basically the same drill. You hold it card facing you like this, stabilize, and then run it along the edge. Now with an ink pad, you're going to want to rotate just to make sure that you're not running along the same groove and using up all the ink in that one area. And if you're not sure about edging it or you want to practice the technique, I would highly recommend getting some note cards, like an index card or some kind of like card for note taking, and then using that in place of a card to practice edging. You can do that not just to get the technique down so that you are nice and stable when you're edging it, but also you can test out the color and then hold it next to your deck of cards to see if you're even going to like that color on the deck. So yeah, that's basically the ins and out of edging a deck. It's, as you can see, it's actually like really simple. It's not that hard. I find the process to be very fun and meditative, so I always love getting to edge a deck, whether it's in black or whether it's in another color. So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. You know, give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. If you want to see more from me, comment down below. Also, if you're interested in seeing a deck chopping tutorial, because I might do that then in the future if enough people are interested. So once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!